This is an Inside the Lords, although actually it's an Inside the Academy of Ideas pre-Battle of Ideas Festival chaotic office room. And we're surrounded by boxes and all of the things that we're taking over to the festival at Church House this weekend. Do come and join us. But let me give you an update on Parliament at the moment. Yesterday was a very successful day for the new Labour government because they had their investment summit and people will have been following the discussions about that. And I do think that Keir Starmer's speech had merit. I'm very keen on economic growth. I think that some of the arguments around the way that bureaucracy and red tape and regulation can get in the way of building houses and the infrastructure that this country needs and the jobs that people need creating has been a source of, really holding back productivity over many years. But one of the things that I kept thinking was, all they're talking about is just getting more money in, getting more money in, getting more money in. It lacked any, in my mind, real sense of vision of where a society is going. And it also completely failed to recognise that many of the bureaucratic red tape measures that they talk about tearing up, they are introducing daily, and I mean daily, since they came into power. And they are not people I would necessarily trust as a government to clear the way for this great new vision of a dynamic economic boom. But nonetheless, you want it to work, but I'm just sceptical. One of the reasons why I'm very sceptical is that in the most anodyne of their pieces of legislation that are coming up, there are some really serious assaults on our freedoms. And so one example is the new employment law legislation that's coming up, which, to be honest with you, it's been posited by Angela Rayner and her supporters as this great step forward for workers' rights. Let me assure you, it's pretty lukewarm when it comes to workers' freedoms fought for over many years. It's a little bit of, you can choose whether you go into the office or not. And, the 0-hour contracts, you can choose them or not choose them. It's things like that. I don't want to entirely dismiss it, but it's not as revolutionary as they say. But hidden in there is an update of the equality law, which is going to have a detrimental impact on all our freedoms, because constantly they pose workers' rights as needing to be protected all the time by the state. And so one of the things they've done is updated the equality, or they're proposing to do, is to update the equalities law so that anybody who works in a place that's public facing can be protected if they are harassed by a third party, and the employer, the boss, is liable. And you might think, well, that sounds harassment. It's not very good. You want to be protected about that. Except harassment under this government is if you hear anything which you can conceive as harassment, i.e. you hear offensive language or somebody says something to you. Now, think about the implications of this for the hospitality world, for anyone who organises an event, that a member of staff can complain that they've been harassed because they've heard somebody say something that they found offensive or harassing, and as a consequence of which there's going to be huge liability on employers, student unions, universities, pubs, nightclubs, all the rest of it, in case members of the public misbehave. And there's always that lurking threat, I'm afraid, with this government, that underneath it all, there'll be less freedom by the time they finish having the conversation. And that was particularly important to me because in the Lords, there has been a discussion about renewing and rewriting a code of conduct. And the thing that's important about that is that codes of conduct were not a feature of life in Parliament for many years. There was honourable ways of behaving. There's something called the companion in the Lords, which you kind of read. It's a big tome, but it's not actually rules. It's kind of advice on, how long you should speak for, the kind of parliamentary language when you have to say "my noble lord" and all that sort of thing. And those, it seems to me, to be reasonable ways of operating. Code of conduct, very modern, guess what? They keep updating it. And the last time they updated it, they introduced anti-bullying, anti-harassment and anti-sexual harassment parts of that code. And I went through and gave a speech in which I really pulled that apart to indicate that what this was really about was policing the way that parliamentary debate should happen. It was consistently saying that certain behaviours will be seen in the most malign fashion. It would completely damage our freedom to speak as parliamentarians if it were to be read carefully, policed properly and taken seriously. We're just kind of lucky that they don't read it that often, but people are done under this code, and it's completely weaponised to demonise certain people as being bullies or harassers and so on. So I went through that, and I'm very nervous about this rewriting of the code, because every time we hear anyone from the Labour front benches speak, they're constantly saying, you know, cut down on the vitriol, don't say anything offensive, keep it, you know, let's be polite and civil. And, you know, how dare they really? There's plenty of things I want to be vitriolic about, and a lot of what they're doing is part of it. And I think that we've got to just be very careful about these attempts at shaping our behaviour. And all of the legislation that they're proposing in present times, it seems to me to be an evasion of what really needs to happen, and all about policing what we do. So to just use an example, I'm a great fan of Wes Streeting. I'm delighted that Wes Streeting is saying he's going to reform, revolutionise the NHS, and that there'll be no sacred cows. Sounds great. But all of the announcements that they've made are things like, we're going to ban the advertising of certain types of food, junk food near schools. We're going to ban junk food shops being in the vicinity of schools. We're going to ban smoking outside in gardens. And then they say the NHS is at stake. So this is not revolutionising the NHS. This is damaging our freedom to be citizens by them policing our behaviour. So I'm very wary of that. The only other thing to say is on the Labour Party's first 100 days in power, we're going to be discussing this at the Battle of Ideas in some detail. Battle of Ideas Festival, Church House, 19th and 20th of October, this weekend. Come along, 100 panel debates, 400 speakers, thousands of us gathering, and the slogan, conversations for the public, with the public, in public, is key. And that's really what I wanted to say, which is that the Labour Party have been in power for 102 days now, I think, and constantly I keep thinking that they're not interested in conversations with the public, for the public, in public at all. The public are kind of a stage army for them. They're really not interested in listening, which is why I think we've seen with all of the Crony-gate incidents, the passes for glasses, all of the scandals around money and so on, where they actually seem genuinely outraged that anyone should criticise them. They believe that they are acting on our behalf. They are the righteous, the virtuous. And when the public say, why are you doing that? You know, complain about anything from winter fuel allowance to, as I say, some of the more instances of dodgy behaviour verging on corruption, placing people in jobs that were, you know, spads, and suddenly they become civil servants, bending the rules so they can get what they want. When anyone challenges them from the public, or indeed the media on behalf of the public, even their friendly media, Keir Starmer looks absolutely outraged that anyone would have the temerity to take him on. And I think that in the spirit of that, I, as a parliamentarian, want to say, I'm going to take you on. I'm not going to be kind of gaslit into being quiet and worrying that you're going to think that I'm being divisive. And also, I think the public need to do that, which is to keep holding them directly to account for what they say they're going to do and what they're not going to do. We're going to discuss innovation at the Battle of Ideas, one of the sessions that we're having. And it really did strike me, the kind of petulant small-mindedness of the government for all of the excitement around the investment summit, that they didn't give any credit whatsoever to the fact that a lot of those investment deals were in fact done by the previous government. They refuse to acknowledge that, even though they blame all the problems on the previous government. But they also refuse to have Elon Musk at the event. And I mean, I don't care whether Elon Musk upset them over X. I don't care whether he said a nasty, hurty thing about Keir Starmer. He is obviously one of the most significant innovators in the world, and he wanted to come, and he says he wants to invest in the UK. So if they're going to let that kind of petty, petulant behaviour get in the way of what's best for the country, then we might be anxious and nervous. I also think it's worth saying that I do think, refuse to acknowledge the concerns of the public around difficult, awkward questions such as immigration and mass immigration. And I don't feel comfortable myself with the way that some people have confused concern about immigration with being anti-immigrant and the kind of growth of ethno-nationalism. Actually, some of these issues are going to be thorny issues going to be discussed at the Battle of Ideas. But I tell you what you don't do is try and dismiss people's concerns, is to kind of just get rid of them, or to just come out with a soundbite and say, oh, we're fighting the gangs, that will do. There are real, genuine problems with the way that British society is operating, and many people feel alienated and they fit in their local areas. And they are worried about big cultural differences between people who are moving here, living here, sometimes illegally, sometimes legally, who are not prepared to buy into a British way of life, whatever that means. And you can dismiss that, but you've got to talk about it. If you try and shut it up, you're simply going to fuel that infamous far right that they go on and on and on about all of the time. There's so many things that we're going to discuss at the Battle of Ideas, so I'll just finish with a tribute to somebody who's just died, which is Alex Salmond. Alex Salmond, as you know, died completely shockingly at the weekend when he had a heart attack, it seems, in Macedonia. Alex Salmond spoke at the Battle of Ideas in the past, and he made a great... He came in and took on the arguments around Scottish nationalism, arguments, by the way, which none of us agreed with. He also, but he held his own. He listened, he discussed, he respected free speech. I also did a number of events with Alex Salmond, not only on his programmes and on his podcast, but I also was involved in his the eyes have it, the nose have it, which was a fantastically conceived debate series that he did at Edinburgh Fringe and subsequently even in the West End, where he would have people arguing one case very clearly and the other side arguing another. And I argued against him on Scottish nationalism. Can you imagine, in Edinburgh? But I have to say, it was a very good-humoured, well-conducted, intelligent debate. And even though I was in a massive minority, it didn't matter. And then we then had the row about Brexit on the West End. I was on the same side as Mike Graham and David Davis, his great friend, and he took on with the Remainers, Andrew Marr himself and somebody else, I can't remember. And I kept thinking his respect for free speech, his preparedness to argue, does indicate the kind of politician he was. It was a rarity because he believed that you should always have the argument out in public. He trusted the public, and he made a fantastic point in the final speech that he gave, which was that you have to trust the democratic wishes of people, accept referendum results, even if you didn't like them. And that was one of his key points in his last speech. I mean, what a fantastic tribute to him. I also wanted to just, in passing, note that another friend of the Academy of Ideas, Kevin Bean, died at the weekend as well. And again, Kevin Bean and I argued over many things over the years. But what I noted in the social media posts put up by his students, because he was an academic in Liverpool, a professor of Irish studies, was they all said that he challenged them, he made them think that although they argued with him, that they loved having those arguments out, because he wasn't somebody who just sulked if he didn't agree with him. He didn't impose his views. He argued things through. So, you know, for Alex Salmond and for Kevin Bean, the Battle of Ideas is the kind of tribute that we would want to put for those great thinkers and people involved in politics. It's a place where you can come and argue. You can listen to different opinions. And unlike Parliament, we won't be tone policing you. We won't be saying, be careful of your P's and Q's. You're not using the right equity, diversity and inclusion language. We won't be shouting at you if you say something we disagree with. We'll be encouraging you to speak about the 100 discussions that we're having over the weekend. So come along and join us and get a taste of what real democracy is at the Battle of Ideas at the weekend at Church House. Tickets still available. You can even buy tickets on the door. See you there.